What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. Very happy to say we have a guest team reveal where we're just 2 days out from the deadline. So we're going to talk through Pras's current draft, some of the key talking points as well, which I'm sure is going to help any of you that are still looking to make changes for your draft. Pras, thanks for coming on again. Second time during preseason. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And it's a pleasure always to be here and getting so close to the deadline. So very excited.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel, but I'm ready to get locked in because I know the next few days are just going to be loads of stressing over one or two positions, whereas most of the team's going to be locked in. How are you feeling? You ready to go?
Yeah, ready to go. I think, we do stress about one or two positions or maybe three or four, but ultimately we know that 11 players are locked in and you're basically messing around the edges. So you can't go too wrong. I think the main decisions have been made. Your double premium or triple premium versus your Salah and, or not. So I think I'm feeling comfortable.
Good stuff. All right, let's just get straight into the draft. So I actually put out two drafts myself yesterday. One was kind of a 4-4-2, one was a 5-3-2, similar to yours. And I had been thinking about kind of moving to how you've done it, right? So in mine, I've just got Martinelli instead of the 8 million slot, and I got a bit more money in defence. Do you think that £8 million price point in midfield is one that you really want to cover? Is that why Saka's in there?
It's why it's in there, but I'm a little bit mixed whether I want to cover it or not. And the theory is, I mean, we all started with so many midfielders at 8 million, right? We had Diaz, Maddison, Mount, Saka. And slowly they've sort of started to dwindle away. I mean, after the Community Shield, I clearly think that Robertson is a better pick than Diaz. I mean, Diaz is a fine pick, but with Jota, with Nunes coming into the mix, I think he's a little bit of a risk. With Martinelli being so much nailed, it makes Saka a little bit less appealing. Saka, again, will be great, but you can save 2 million by going Martinelli. Then you have Kulusevski with the risks. You have Mount when you can go James. So I am sort of going flip-flop with whether I want the 8 million slot or not. And it's going to come down to whether I want a City mid in game week 2, which is a Foden or a Mahrez.
Yeah, I'm thinking slightly differently with Diaz because I think Jota's not going to be back training for 2 weeks. So I don't think we're going to see Jota until maybe game week 4, possibly even a little bit later. And I do wonder that if having Diaz in there, I mean, it could be any £8 million midfielder, but it still gives you that chance that when Jota comes back, you could move off to any of those other options, right? Saka, Mount, like you said, the Man City mid. So I'm a little bit higher on Diaz, but yeah, I can see why you'd want to go Martinelli. And also last night, so we're recording this on Wednesday morning. It's going to go out Wednesday evening, so there won't be too much time. But last night I saw a tweet saying that Smith Rowe is also going to be out for the first game, or likely to be out. So Martinelli's pretty much nailed. So I kind of agree. And also, I don't know what you think about this, but the penalty situation, everyone seems to think it's now Saka. I personally think I would give him like maybe 60-70%, but we don't know for sure. Martinelli might step up and take the next penalty.
Yeah, or Jesus. I mean, the theory is whoever's winning it is taking them. So we don't know yet. If Saka's on pens, I think it even makes him better than Jesus. But obviously, we can't go there without knowing it.
Yeah, in some ways I'd rather not know because I think Jesus' ownership is so high. I don't really want to be tempted to get rid of him. All right, let's move off Saka for just a minute. We'll come on to the defence as well because obviously there's a lot of players there in just a sec. Let's talk about Haaland first of all because Haaland versus Kane has been one of the big questions through the community. I think on the FPL site right now, Haaland is still higher owned. But anytime I take any samples from Twitter, and there was a poll I did the other day, Kane is coming out higher, but by about 20-30%. So it's quite a big difference between what overall managers are doing. How set are you on Haaland, or is it still like a kind of move that's going to go down to the wire?
I think I'm pretty set, and it's not an easy decision. So for people who think, I've settled on, I'm going against Spurs, I'm not. I'm really basically saying that game week 1, Kane is going to outscore Haaland, and I believe that. He plays Southampton at home. We don't know about Haaland West Ham away, but I do know that I want Haaland Bournemouth at home, possibly even to captain. So I'm trying to kind of play game theory here where I'm seeing if I have Kane, if I definitely move him to Haaland, then I might as well just start with Haaland. And then if I'm wrong, I can move to Kane in game week 3. That's the thinking. Because knowing myself, even if Kane, let's say, scores a brace and Haaland blanks, I might still move to Haaland in game week 2. So then what's the point? What am I really gaining if I'm not even captaining Kane in game week 1? That's the thinking.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, right? And I should say, there's a video that's gone out as we're recording, right? My Game Week preview's gone out, so people will have probably seen that before they see this video. And I kind of came to the same conclusion as that. I've thought about the Kane Game Week 1 and Haaland Game Week 2 switch. I just don't see what can, apart from an injury or Haaland not starting, which I don't think is going to happen, I don't see what stops me wanting Haaland in Game Week 2. So I think the switch is better in Game Week 3, like you said, because Kane's fixtures are really good. Then Wolves at higher. I think they got Forest as well, maybe in Game Week 4 or 5. So I think if you're going to switch, you do it that way. And obviously, if Haaland does smash it against Bournemouth, then you can talk yourself into keeping. So yeah, right. That's kind of how I came to this like same conclusion. Basically, I think it's really important for people that are making their teams to just accept that other players are going to score points. Like none of us don't have Kane or Son because we think they're bad. It's just it's really hard to kind of fit them in. So I'm glad you said that, just because it mainly confirms my bias to go with Haaland as well.
I would say the people who are going with Kane have then the conviction to keep him. You don't get tempted to switch for Bournemouth. Just keep him because he has the better Game Week 1, possibly Game Week 3 and 4 fixtures. Just hold off, and then a Kane play makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, let's talk about another Spurs player you got in your team, Perisic. Again, I'd be interested to get your thoughts, because I think people are very divided on what his game time's going to be like. I've got my opinion, so I won't say too much. But do you think he's someone that's likely to stick for you?
He will stick, but I think he's a short-term pick. And people sort of are skeptical now, but wait till the midweek games start. And then I'm thinking that he's there till Game Week 4, when Spurs have these 3 easy games, which is, the first game, Southampton, then you have Chelsea, not so good, but then you have Wolves at home and Nottingham Forest. So you want him for 3 of those games at a minimum. And the thinking is, if Conte wants to give him minutes ahead of Chelsea, well, he has to play him against Southampton. So if he plays, I think he's explosive. We saw in the Roma match how far forward he was, how much he was crossing and shooting the ball. So he is basically a selfish wing back, Marcus Alonso types, not really getting into the box as much. I want a part of it. And if I'm wrong, I'll switch. I'm not sort of married to him like a Robertson or a Cancelo or a Trent, where I want to keep him for the whole season. There will be patches where I want him. And I think Game Week 4 is the period where there's no midweek fixtures in between. After 4, there's a midweek Game Week 5, and then there's Game Week 6. That's the point where if you're not really convinced, then just come off.
Yeah, and I think at that point we'll have a good idea of what his kind of fitness levels are at as well. I mean, if he's played the first 4 games, he's probably doing well. I think it'll be interesting to see how Conte manages his squad around Europe, whether he I don't think he's necessarily going to prioritise Champions League versus Premier League, because they're both going to be really difficult to win. But we might see, sometimes we get like patterns of rotation, which obviously we need to see a few games before we can, see if there is anything there. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I'm also on Perisic. What do you think about Doherty? Are you... I know you don't have him, which is fair enough. You do have a 5 million spot in Trippier, which could be Doherty, it could be Kyle Walker. Are you as sure about Doherty's minutes, or are you a little bit worried?
I am more worried about Doherty's minutes, only because he has been trying Lucas Moura. Now, it's not, if he was happy with the position, you don't try a midfielder, like a Victor Moses. You don't do that if you're happy with the Doherty coming back, because you already have Emerson as a backup. So he's almost gone with, I want 3 there. And that worries me a little bit. Now, the plus for Doherty is that Perisic is somebody who you think will always come on, right? He's basically the guy, even if he doesn't start, he'll come on for 20, 30 minutes, which is actually dangerous for us. But Doherty, you'd think that if he doesn't start, maybe he goes with an Emerson in the beginning. It's not that he needs a Doherty to come on as the impact sub. So you could actually get away, if you have a good first bench, to have a Doherty. But I just think there's so many good explosive options in the 5 million bracket. Number one, it's a good price point to have in your team. But number 2, you can go from the spectrum of very boring to a Walker or a Zinchenko, to the very explosive to a Trippier, to a Doherty. I mean, make your pick, and you can also sort of choose to switch out if you don't see it working out.
Yeah, I kind of think that Doherty is still first choice, but I'm a little bit more worried about his fitness versus Perisic. I think because he did start and then he didn't play a few games, and I just wonder if he's having a bit more of an issue getting up to track. The other thing for me as well is like Doherty was already there when Conte got there. Perisic is his signing, so I think I'm a little bit more kind of assured about his minutes. So yeah, I think that 5 million price point is interesting. What do you think about Kyle Walker? Because Man City still haven't signed another fullback, and to be honest, at this point, the players they're getting linked to, I don't really know much about them. They could be great, but I don't feel like they're a name that's going to come in and play straight away. So do you think Kyle Walker is, like, I don't want to say safe, but a better pick than maybe he was if Cucurella had come in?
Absolutely. He's a decent enough pick. And like we've mentioned, you could go for a Walker. And if you see if Man City have signed somebody, the caliber of the player, if it was Cucurella, I mean, we knew that, he's a Barcelona product. Pep loves him. He could fit in straight away. Premier League experience as well. If he's signing anybody from outside the Premier League, you will definitely have the bedding in time that Pep does with these players. So Walker should be, like you said, slightly safe until the first wild card. And if you see the signing has happened, then you can again switch to all these options that we've talked about.
Definitely. One player I don't see in your team, which I was very surprised about when you sent me over the draft, because I know how much you love him, is Reece James. Is not in the team. As far as we know, Chelsea before Game Week 1 are not going to sign any new right backs or right wing backs. They're still linked with some, but we've not seen any movement on that. Cucurella actually seems more likely at this point for Chelsea at the time of recording. Any way he makes it in, are you gonna? Because I mean, you've not, unless Saka goes, there's not really a huge amount of spots to take money out unless Ramsdale goes down to a 4.5, and then you would have to switch out Perisic as well.
Correct. So that's the compromise. To get a Saka, you need to get, or a Mount, you need to get rid of a James as your fourth defender, and I'm not happy with that. So yes, obviously the other alternative to this draft is Saka becomes Martinelli and the 5 million option becomes a James. The thinking here is that they're linked to a lot of players and Chelsea are in flux. So I'm not sort of shying away from that. And James is a good pick regardless. I think the way James has been priced, a 6 million is a centre-back price. Diaz is 6 million. Other players who are decent from a top 3 team are 6 million centre back. So if James was to play right wing back every single game, he's a 7.5 million player. So I think he's great value. And my only issue is I want to watch until the deadline what's happening with Cucurella. They're also linked with Dumfries, for example. So, that sort of stuff will sort of narrow it down. Cucurella, if he signs, I think he will become the best Chelsea defender because he may play the left centre back, but also share minutes with Chilwell when he plays left wing back. So at 5 million, another great player that we could pick from a Chelsea team.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah, because I think, well, he's probably not going to start Game Week 1 now. That probably would be a little bit risky. But I mean, maybe if they got the signing done today, possibly he could play straight away. I think that would be a good price because Mendy's obviously the same price, right? And he would have slightly higher upside. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I think he probably will be someone that comes in later on. And I mean, you've kind of mentioned it a few times now about price points, right? The fact you got Trippier means you can move to Walker, Zinchenko, Gabriel, all those players we've already mentioned. Does that play on your mind when you're building your team? Because we obviously had that conversation on Twitter about structure and about how hard or easy it is to move between particular price points. Does that play on your mind?
It plays on my mind. Look, a bandwagon can come anywhere, right? We haven't talked about Mitrovic as a forward spot. We've talked about the 8 million points. For me right now, the players that get me most excited, or on the flip side that I'm fearing the most, are defenders that emerge out of nowhere and they become great picks. And this is why I think my final draft will be a 5 at the back. Even though, for example, a 5.0 defensive spot plus a 4.5 million midfielder is the same as a Neto, which is 5.5 plus a 4.0 defender. So a Neto for me is equivalent to a 5 million defender in a structure, but I've gone for the 5 million defender because of the fact that I fear these guys a lot more. And that's where I'm trying to build flexibility. I'm actually less conscious about the 8 million price bracket. So if I would move, I would sort of get 5 million up to James so that if I need to take money out, I can always do that later. And I have a midfield which is slightly thin, but look, that's the sacrifice that you need to make. So you'll either make that sacrifice in your third defender or your fourth defender, or you'll try to make it in your second midfielder, whether it's an 8 million or not.
For sure. Okay, here's a scenario for you then. Let's say, obviously it's difficult to answer because we don't know who's going to perform the first couple of weeks. But let's say with this squad, Leon Bailey loses his place, right? Which I've got Leon Bailey in my squad right now, but I do think there's a chance that 1 or 2 bad performances and he's just out because Gerrard has so many options for Aston Villa. What would then be the plan? Because you'd have to, I mean, you could start playing Andreas Pereira every week, but that's maybe not ideal. Like, where do you think the first downgrade comes?
Saka. This is why I'm not so happy.
That.
Exactly. So Saka goes down to Martinelli, and then Bailey comes to a Grealish if he's looking good. Or I can sort of bring a Perisic down to a 4.5 if I see that White has nailed down his spot, even though Tomiyasu's back. Then he comes down to a 4.5, and then I can go to a Martinelli. So I'll have a Saka, Martinelli, and Jesus front line if I didn't have Ramsdale, obviously. So these are things I'm thinking about, but What I'm trying to do with the Saka spot in this draft is basically start with Saka. If he does well against Crystal Palace, which is not an easy game, then I'll stay. But otherwise, if a midfielder from Man City emerges, I'll move to a Foden, for example, because Bournemouth, at least early on, looks like a team to target. So you got Bailey in there as game week 1, target Bournemouth. Game week 2, you get a Man City. I already have Haaland, maybe a second midfielder from Man City. And then game week 3, I sort of restructure the team as I see more trends coming through.
Yep, sounds good to me. One of the things I know you mentioned that you wanted to kind of talk about is Diaz versus Robertson. So I know in this draft it doesn't... I mean, you could change Robertson out and obviously switch Saka to Diaz, but for some people, they're literally looking at 5-3-2 versus 4-4-2. In fact, that's the exact thing I talked about in my video yesterday, Diaz versus Robertson. Where's your head at with that? Do you just think it's Robertson and that's it because he's just the safest pick?
And it's not just about safe. I think my wildcard timing is game week 9 after the international break. So I'm sort of breaking it up and saying for the first 8 game weeks, I will absolutely not have 3 Liverpool. And so even if I went to Diaz slot, I don't see the logic because I will, if that is only there so that I can maneuver him and change to somebody else, well, I will actually be more upset losing a third Liverpool slot than jumping on a bandwagon, which is, let's say Mason Mount or Kulusevski. So I feel like if I have the Robertson slot nailed, and if I'm then trying to maneuver the bandwagons, if I don't get to a Mount, fair enough. I would rather have a Robertson over any other midfielder that comes up. So I'll just stay patient with Robertson for the 8 weeks. I know with Diaz, I won't do that. I know with Núñez, I won't do that. So that's basically the thinking. I don't think Diaz is a bad pick at all. I think if I was to rank the 8 million midfielders, I would say Saka and Diaz are up there, but both of them suffer from a third or a second player, which is cheaper than them. And possibly even, maybe in Diaz's case, better.
Yeah, I quite like that way of thinking, actually, because one thing I did last year was started with Mahrez and Gundogan. And originally I had, I think it was Son and Rafinha or something like that, 2 players that you can rely to start every single week. And that same thing happened first couple of weeks. They stopped getting minutes, they came off early or they didn't start, and suddenly you got transfers to make. So I do agree with what you're saying about, I still think Diaz is going to be fine till Jota's in, but someone like Darwin Núñez, for example, if you're an FPL manager that cannot hold your nerve, as soon as he gets benched, which could be game week 1, I know what the questions are going to be. Should we get rid of Darwin Núñez? Should we get rid of him? So I think it's important to think about those players and not have too many risks. Like in your team, I would say Perisic maybe some doubts. I personally don't have them, but I appreciate why people do. Leon Bailey for me is another quite exciting pick for game week 1, but I do have some doubts. But outside of that, every other player should be okay. Haaland, obviously, we'll wait and see how Pep uses him, but I think most of us think he's going to start pretty well. So yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking, not having too many of those risky picks that you're going to have to start making transfers straight away on. Let me ask you one final thing about goalkeeper. How set are you on Ramsdale? Because I cannot believe how many different goalkeepers I've had in my drafts this season. I'm pretty sure last year, Sanchez got priced at 4.5. We all stuck him in the draft, and that was it until game week 1. I've had 7 this season. How stuck are you on Ramsdale?
I'm not stuck at all. I'm very open. So, for example, in this draft, I can easily go to a Mendy because I don't have any Chelsea defense. I can easily go down to a Sanchez plus Ward, and that's actually a good rotation. If Ward ends up starting game week 1, you play him against Brentford, and then Sanchez has a very good fixture run until game week 8. So I'm actually quite happy to have a 4.5 keeper, and that might also give me the funds to bring a Bailey up to a Neto, maybe either initially or I can just keep the money in the bank. So I am open to doing that. I have slightly come off Edison because I just think Walker would be the pick if I was to go for him. And I think even keeping a third Man City slot open isn't the bad shout either. So I'm at the moment on Ramsdale, Mendy, or Sanchez, and I think I'll end up in one of those 3.
Yeah, I promise you we've not been talking in the DMs, but the other day on a video I mentioned the same thing about Edison. I was really hot. I do think he's probably in isolation the best 5.5, but I do wonder about just keeping that third spot open. I actually have same concerns about Ramsdale too, just because it feels like there's so many Arsenal options. But I think just because the defenders are not at the level of a Reece James or a Perisic or a Robertson, I can probably get away with it. But that has crossed my mind as well. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
My bench is thin, but I guess, look, I've made my peace with the fact that I won't need a lot of bench slots. I think Andres Pereira is a good pick. He also covers, in my draft, Trippier very well. So when Trippier has Man City and Liverpool in game week 3 and 5, Andreas has Brentford and Brighton at home in those 2 game weeks. So that's basically a small bit. And then other than that, I don't have much. And I've actually gone for the worst third striker because I just want a lone guy because I hope I never get to a third bench. So that's where I'm at.
Interestingly, right, I know I said we're going to wrap up. I was chatting to some people the other day about the 4.5 stocks. I know some people are worried about Greenwood up front because he's so highly owned, and therefore if people realise he's not going to play, he could come off. But I do wonder, there's Taylor at Forest, I think, Greenwood at Leeds, and then Archer at Villa. One thing I keep forgetting is the 5 subs. So these players might get some minutes. So it might be... That's how I'm thinking. I'm probably going to go for one of them instead of just going for someone that's super low. I think ultimately you just pick a player from a team you're not going to want triple up on, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's the key. Archer, I've gone off a little bit. I know we're talking now basement picks, but it's basically because if Bailey is playing, then they're playing a diamond. And they're not playing 2 up top. Sorry, they're not playing a diamond. They're playing the 4-3-3, which is basically Ings will be the first guy who comes on instead of an Archer. If they're playing 2 strikers, then Archer had great appeal, but it's not looking like where Gerrard will go.
Yeah, I know Aston Villa fans are very high on him. I just wonder if that's sometimes, like, I think sometimes with fan bases, and it's not just a Villa thing, you get quite high on the young players because you want to see them play, and I'm not sure that necessarily always translates to they will actually play. But I guess, look, like we said, they're basement picks. Any of them are risk. You just got to hope the one you pick at least comes on for 20 minutes, maybe in the odd game. So, yeah, good stuff. If you want to follow Pras, which I highly recommend you do, you can follow him on Twitter, Pras_FPL. He also does a really good video every single week on the Fantasy Football Scout channel on YouTube called Burning Questions, which he's actually going to run off and do in 38 minutes after we've recorded this one. So that'll probably be out later today or tomorrow.
It'll be live, so yeah.
It's live. Okay, so you can go.
So you would have actually watched it already by the time this is out.
Good stuff. And if you haven't caught it, you can go and do that. I'll put links in the description below. Pras, thank you very much for joining me.
Sure, it's been a pleasure. Good luck with your last minute tinkering. Look forward to getting started.
There will be a lot of last minute tinkering. No matter how calm I am now, which I am pretty calm, and how much my team's locked in, something will happen in the last minute. It always does. But yeah, we'll get you on the channel again at some point during the season. If you have enjoyed that, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll be back tomorrow with another video.